Hello, I'm Monique Beadles and welcome to the True Worth podcast. Today my guest is Kate Clark. Now, Kate founded Clark and Associates Mediation Services in 2017 after a career in criminal defence and family law. She had a view to offering specialised mediation services across a wide range of areas. She holds a Bachelor of Laws, a Bachelor of Behavioural Science in Psychology, is a family dispute resolution practitioner and nationally accredited mediator. She was named in the Year 101 Women in Law by the Women's Law Association of Queensland. Her firm offers specialised mediation services in family dispute resolution, including child inclusive mediation with clinical psychologists, restorative justice mediation, workplace disputes, neighbourhood disputes, commercial disputes, and redress scheme direct personal response facilitations. So welcome, Kate. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you, Monique. Lovely to be here.
So we can hear from your background here that you're a lawyer, but that you are working in mediation, or that has become the niche specialty area where you've decided to specialise. So can you give us a little bit of an idea of the sorts of situations where you work, or the types of scenarios where mediation is needed?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. So since 2017, I've worked solely in the space of dispute resolution. And it's an area of practice in law that I think is generally undervalued. And we'll talk probably a little bit more about that later. But it's an area that I'm really passionate about. And I think predominantly the reason why I'm so passionate about it is because of the difference that it can make for individuals who walk through our doors in their lives in a moment that's usually really a terrible moment, a moment of crisis, whether that's because of a dispute in a personal aspect of their life, or a dispute in a business sense, which always still has personal impacts, or some other sort of organisational dispute, which again still has personal impacts. So it's something that I take very seriously. And I think that I'm very lucky actually to work in this area to assist people in the way that we endeavour to do.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think it's really true what you've said there, which is even if it's a corporate matter or an organisational dispute, which, you know, I suppose from a legal basis is between two entities. However, it's real people who are involved in these disputes, and it has real personal impacts, doesn't it, for those people?
It really does. And I think sometimes, you know, there are some matters on the face of it where the human component isn't at the forefront. But actually, when you start engaging with the people that are going to be involved in the dispute resolution process, there are real personal consequences for people that are involved in conflict. Even if, for example, you're talking to the CEO of a large organisation about what might be quite a minor dispute, you know, across the lifespan of that business, all types of conflict have impacts and harms that can occur for people. And having that at the forefront of our mind is something that we really always endeavour to do. Because for us, one of our core values is to ensure that the experience that individuals have with us is an experience which feels comfortable and genuine. And because we start from that position, we get a lot of really good feedback from people that they've felt very heard in the process of mediation. You know, I've even had a client recently say to me that she felt held during the process of mediation, which I thought was a really nice visual explanation of her experience. Of course, I didn't actually hold her during her mediation process because that wouldn't be appropriate, but she felt held, which to me described this sensation of, you know, being carried through a process that was otherwise potentially quite traumatic for her.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of times people are coming to this situation where they've already been through, you know, a difficult event or experience, they're already quite traumatized, and then this process itself can either be traumatizing or re-traumatizing for them, can't it? So the way that you do things then, the way you've set up your firm is with a bit of a different approach to what many others might have. So can you tell us what's unique about your approach?
Yeah, our approach, I think, is quite unique. And it's funny because over time, I'm more convinced that our approach, of course, is the right approach. But that's not coming from a place of ego. It's coming from a place of watching our clients and how they can then participate in the process. And also the feedback that we receive from people. But predominantly, I would say that the difference between our mediation service and other mediation services is that we do truly focus on the individuals and tailoring our service to the individuals, as opposed to taking individuals that are in crisis and just sticking them into a cookie cutter approach to resolving their dispute. And I think the tailoring of our service is something that people find quite remarkable. Because as you say, there can be some dehumanizing aspects to processes like litigation, and how you want things to go and how they go often don't align. And so if there can be any tailoring to the needs of individuals, I think that feels both very supportive, but also quite empowering for people who maybe have been quite disempowered by processes in the lead up to mediation. So the way that we really do that, I know it sounds probably quite fanciful, well, you just tailor your service, but the way that we do that is to really engage with people on a one-on-one basis. So the first thing that we do is a really thorough intake session with every single individual who will actually be attending the mediation. And that includes not only the parties, but also any support people that they may like to bring. So we go through a really in-depth process of meeting people, explaining what the process might look like, engaging with them in conversation about how we could tailor aspects of the service, because of course there are some things you can't tailor. Some things must remain the same. But helping them understand what choices are available and engaging with them in choice making, I think, is something that sets us apart from other people. And, it's really interesting because still to this day, we'll, contact, for example, lawyers who are representing a party at a mediation and explain to them that we have this very thorough intake process. And sometimes we get really negative feedback from lawyers about that. Why do you need to talk to my client? I don't want you engaging with my client before the mediation. My first response is actually under the regulations, intake sessions and screening procedures are required, but they're not routinely done by mediators, which still fascinates me. From an intellectual point of view, because I'm such a rule follower. But yeah, for example, last week a lawyer told me that in her 10 years of practice, none of her clients had ever been to an intake session. And I actually felt really sad for the 10 years of clients that she's been supporting. Not that she's done anything wrong, but that none of those people were given an opportunity to touch base with a professional who was going to be working with them to try and resolve their dispute. And what that might have felt like for some of those people, maybe not all of those people, maybe for some of those people it felt fine, but maybe for some of those people, they felt really anxious about the process ahead. They didn't understand what the process was going to look like, so they didn't prepare for it in the best possible way. And I'm sure that lawyers do a really good job of trying to explain mediation, but wouldn't you want to have contact with the person who's going to be doing the job? I think about, for example, when you're going to have a surgical procedure. If you're only talking to the surgery nurse and not the surgeon, you'd feel pretty anxious about that, I think. And even having the opportunity to meet them for 5 minutes to get a gauge on who they are, what they're about, what their approach is going to be, would probably feel very reassuring. And it would also remove some ambiguity for people about what the process ahead is going to look like. Will I be completely anaesthetized, or will I be a little bit anaesthetized? What's my recovery going to be like? You want this information from the professional who's actually going to be doing the surgery, or in the case of mediation, the person who's going to be mediating.
Yes.
And yeah, I think that it is sad for a lot of people that they have had some negative experiences with mediation. So one of the first questions I ask people, just hitting on your comment about traumatization and re-traumatization, I'm a trauma-informed practitioner, so it's something that's always at the forefront of my mind. And processes do traumatize people as well as actual incidents. So one thing I ask people is, have you been to mediation before? What has this process been like for you up until this point? What's been working well? What hasn't been working well? And some of the answers I've received over the years are quite disturbing. I've had people tell me that they've been through really harmful processes. And it's really important to know that, because if you don't, you could have a party walk into a mediation who is really not coping at all, and you wouldn't understand the reasons why they're not coping. And it could be because they're assuming that the process that they went through before was the appropriate process, and that they're going to go through it again. And you may be able to dispel some of that just through conversation, where you give them some reassurances, or you create a strategy to avoid those particular issues. And the problem is, some people say, well, what does it really matter? Who really cares? All that matters is the outcome at the end of the day. Well, what could the outcome possibly look like? If you have someone coming along to a process, they're feeling highly stressed, or they're being traumatized or re-traumatized, or they don't understand the process, are you really going to get the best out of that process? And my answer is probably not.
Yeah, so obviously your, experience, both your legal training and that you have training in psychology as well, really helps you to bring all of that knowledge and experience to the role that you play there. But not all mediators have to have legal training or psychology training, I suppose. So, I mean, what do you think that the value of that is, the value that that training brings to the way that you run these mediation processes?
I think it's incredibly important, Monique. There are many services that offer some really fantastic options of mediation at a low cost to people in community, which is really important. But a lot of those services do have people who don't have a foundational profession. And I think that having a foundation of another profession like law or psychology or even social work, when you're working with people who are in conflict and are potentially in crisis, I think is fundamentally important, because you do run the risk of further harming people. And that's something that we should all take really seriously. But in addition to that, having legal training is of such an incredible advantage, because I think I figured out this morning that I've been admitted as a lawyer for over 13 years now. And I have a wealth of understanding of not only what it's like in practice, but I also had the wonderful opportunity of being an associate at the Family Court of Australia in the Court of Appeal Division. So I've also had this exposure to what court looks like from both perspectives, both as a legal practitioner and also behind the scenes. And all of that wealth of knowledge allows me to really engage with parties about reality testing, which is a core responsibility of a dispute resolution practitioner. And if you don't really have an understanding of what the law has to say or what it will look like in reality for people, how can you really engage with people in conversations about whether or not they should be considering certain elements in their dispute resolution processing of decision making? If you can't engage with them in those conversations, really all you're doing is being a messenger of communication or offers. You need to have some base knowledge so that you can value add in some way, without, of course, disempowering people or making decisions for them or taking decision-making power away, because that's not the purpose. But drawing to their attention different perspectives, different things that they should be thinking about and analysing in making a decision about whether or not to resolve their dispute.
So you've said there then that a lot of people will just go for the free or the cheap option, that they see it more as perhaps a ticker box exercise that they're required to do, and they're perhaps not really valuing what could be the benefits of a well-run process. And so when it comes to choosing a mediator, whether to go with that option or to go down a private path and, you know, perhaps pay a bit more for someone with experience like yours, do you think that people undervalue that, or they perhaps don't fully understand what the purpose of the mediation is?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people don't understand the purpose of mediation, which is completely understandable. When you think about mediation in a few different areas, for example, family dispute resolution, you may only need a family dispute resolution practitioner once in your life, sometimes more than once. Sometimes people go through the process a few times, but generally speaking, it's not something that you are going to need time and time again.
No.
So trying to understand the purpose of it and what it's for is a special sort of task that you're undertaking in a moment where things aren't going well in your life. So, yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand necessarily what the process of mediation is for. And as I said, I think that's really understandable. I think that people understand the role of lawyers a lot better because obviously we need lawyers in a variety of different situations. And so it makes sense to people to contact lawyers as a first port of call. But it's absolutely available to people to contact mediators as a first port of call. And actually, I'm seeing an increase in that. I think people, just generally speaking, hear about the experiences of either friends or family around them in going through a litigation pathway, and they make a decision that that's not what they want for a variety of reasons. It could be because of the escalation in conflict that they see other people experience, or it could be because of the emotional toll of long processes like litigation that they watch people go through, or it could be because of the costs that they hear about, which is also something that's pretty commonly understood. People, generally speaking, know that when you go off to see a lawyer, it's not going to be a cheap and quick exercise. I think a lot of people who do look for mediators are starting to realise that there are many options available. And I think we can thank Google search for that. You know, how to resolve my family dispute matter, or how to resolve my parenting matter, for example. You know, Google is informing people about all of the options that are available to them. And of course, you know, if you have a good website design, as a dispute resolution practitioner, you can also provide some answers to those questions through frequently asked questions that draw people into your websites, etc. And then making the decision between low cost or private mediation. Look, I think actually it's horses for courses. I think some people just legitimately cannot afford private mediation. And that's why I say that those government funded services are important, and they're great for, you know, people who cannot afford to go through either litigation or private mediation. But I think people also may not see the value in private mediation. It's not an incredibly expensive option. You know, our mediation services are fixed fees. So, for example, for a family dispute resolution mediation for a full day, which includes all of our work in preparation, those thorough intake sessions, and also our work in reporting afterwards, is $3,000, and split between two people is $1,500. If each of those two people go off and see a family lawyer and go through a process of letter writing, being advised formally, and, you know, potentially a lengthy back and forward between two lawyers who start to litigate that matter, which is absolutely a choice available to people and is sometimes necessary. I can guarantee you that they'll quickly burn up a lot more than $3,000. You know, the average hourly rate of a family lawyer, for example, is, you know, between $400 and $600 per hour in Queensland. So you've got a couple of hours of engagement with a lawyer there before you've spent the same amount of money that you may have on a mediation. So I think it is a really good quality, cost-effective option for people. And the timing has to be right. And the timing isn't always at the beginning. Sometimes it's in the middle and sometimes it's at the end. It really just depends on everybody's situation.
But as you sort of described there, that actually perhaps it's something that people should consider more often as a first port of call before they go and spend all that money on a lawyer, rather than, the other way around. Part of that is the fact that our legal system is obviously adversarial in nature. So as soon as you go to a lawyer, well, you're already in conflict, aren't you? So
I think that's right. And even if you aren't in conflict, what I hear a lot of people say is, as soon as I got that first letter from my ex-partner's lawyer, things changed for us,
Yeah.
And sometimes, as I said, it's necessary for people to engage with lawyers. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that. However, every now and then we get calls from people who say, look, and I'm talking in particular in respect of family dispute resolution here, look, we've just separated, 5 months ago. We're still living in the same house together. We're wanting to try and figure this out because actually we've got a pretty conservative asset pool. We've heard a lot of information about our options. Both of us have been to see lawyers for initial consultations. We're a bit terrified about how much it might end up costing. And we think we pretty much fundamentally agree on what to do anyway.
Yeah.
And this is the type of matter in particular where, as you say, going through a guided mediation process could actually be the best decision for that family.
And how about in business disputes or corporate disputes? Because it's perhaps something people don't necessarily think of. In my own, business dealings, I always think if you've got to look at the contract, it's already too late, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
Do you think there's a part that mediation has to play there as well? Particularly,
Absolutely.
perhaps for small business or, other areas where, we're not talking about, big companies where they've got millions of dollars to spend on lawyers.
I even think about big companies and I think, well, sure, you might have lots of money to spend, but do you really want to allocate resources in that way? And I don't think that businesses really do. But I think you're right. I think that in the commercial setting, there's a really great opportunity to mediate a lot of matters as well. And fundamentally, most of the commercial matters that come to us, really a lot of decision making in dispute resolution in commercial matters is about commercially based outcomes and how much it's going to cost. Like a lot of the matters really fall down to this exact analysis. How much will it cost to litigate this issue versus how much will it cost to resolve this issue at mediation? And almost inevitably, there's a window of opportunity that presents in a mediation process where you've narrowed your options down to actually making some really sound commercially based decisions to settle a matter. And then it's about settling it in a way that makes sense for your business or for you as an individual, and to reduce continuous fallout or harms or breakdown of relationship, et cetera, et cetera. I think about, for example, partnership disputes and the hidden cost of those disputes for business. If you have two partners in dispute, sure, they could go and litigate that issue, but what does that mean for the business behind the scenes? The actual cost isn't just the cost of lawyers or the order of the court at the end of the day and who's to pay what, but there are other costs hidden there. The costs of your business perhaps not performing as well as it should, the cost of all of your staff being distracted by having to apply resources to the litigation process, the cost to you as a business owner in being distracted and emotionally overrun by thinking about that litigation process. And these are really important components for people to be thinking about as well. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there's always a really great window of opportunity for dispute resolution. There are a number of different types of commercial matters where you have to go through procedural steps before you can get to mediation, just so that you've ticked all of the relevant boxes. But still, courts love using dispute resolution for a really sound reason. Running court is really expensive and we don't have enough resources available to hear and deal with everybody's disputes. So the courts inevitably are pushing people more and more to use dispute resolution processes. And if you haven't gone through often some pre-step procedures to try and resolve your matter through mediation, then you don't even get to have the court consider your matter. So you should absolutely always try and use it, and not use it as a tick the box exercise. Get prepared for it as if it is going to be the end of the matter.
Yeah. And do you think there's a role there also as for that process too in managing reputational risk? Because obviously once something gets into court, it's in the public domain. There's perhaps the media then get hold of it. I mean, all of those sorts of things are part of what you need to consider as well.
I think reputational risk is a really important consideration. And as you were talking about it, I flicked through, the last 5 commercial mediations I had where we were talking solely about reputational risk as one of the main concerns that people held. And that's because often when we're in conflict, there are a number of decisions that have been made that may not have been our best decisions. And they obviously become amplified in litigation processes. And then all of your other good decisions fall away. And the ones that are most known are the decisions that you made that weren't so sound. So I think you're right, Monique. I think reputational harm is another really important reason to consider mediation, because it's in a confidential, without prejudice environment.
So you obviously have a real wealth of experience, Kate, and you've done a lot of fantastic things in your career. Are there times, though, when you feel that you've personally been underestimated in terms of what you bring to those situations?
Yeah, I think that in every profession, probably you do feel underestimated. Sometimes, as a female in particular, you can feel underestimated, but I don't want this to become some feminist sort of rant.
No.
Because I'm not a feminist. But I think that ultimately there have been many times, in particular in my younger years, where, I had to really work and strive to demonstrate that I had ability. Another example that comes to mind is when I actually moved from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast. And I didn't have a good quality network here at the Sunshine Coast. So I had to go through, really an exercise of building a brand and building a reputation. And yes, I did feel underestimated in those processes. I also noticed that flipping from being a legal practitioner to being a mediator came with some value loss from some people's perspectives, that I wasn't a, quote, real lawyer, end quote, anymore, which I found really interesting, because I think dispute resolution is fundamentally important to legal practice. But there is, I think, some connotation around the fact that when you're not a practicing lawyer, perhaps you don't hold as much value anymore.
Yeah, and that's really about people's perception, isn't it? But again, as you've said before, perhaps this comes from a misunderstanding of the value of mediation and the part it plays, in the real outcomes that people need from these situations. So how, before you started your own firm here, you were a criminal defence lawyer. How do you think that experience helps you here, particularly when it comes to restorative justice or mediation of, people where someone has done something wrong, obviously, and then the other person, who has been wronged? Where's the value, I guess, for them in this sort of process?
Yeah, so again, having that foundational base of having worked in practice as a criminal defence lawyer is really helpful and fundamentally important in my work as a restorative justice mediator. So some people might not know what restorative justice is, and perhaps if I just quickly explain it. Yeah, so restorative justice is really a process of bringing people together who have either harmed or been harmed in an alleged criminal act. And that can look like a variety of different types of matters. So, for example, it could range all the way from assault right through to sexual offending, right through to, for example, fraud, And we've also mediated one matter that was also before the coroner's court, which, as you can imagine, had very serious impacts because it involved the death of a person. So restorative justice mediation is a really important aspect of the work that we do. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And when I was working in criminal defence, I noticed that there was really a gap in the service in Queensland in particular, because our only options really were government practitioners who provide a service which is now called adult conferencing. And really, when you look at some of those processes, they don't really stay true to the methodology of restorative justice mediation, which I personally, as a legal practitioner, found disappointing for not only some of my criminal defence clients, but also for people who were victims and survivors of crime, and other people that had been impacted. So I got into that area because when I was working in criminal defence, there were a number of matters where victims or survivors of crime would actually contact me in my capacity as a criminal defence lawyer and want to engage in a conversation with the defendant about what had happened to all of them. And I found that really interesting because, of course, I have that background in behavioural science, psychology. And I thought, geez, you know, a lot of people in community would think that this is something that people wouldn't want to do. But for each individual, an experience of crime is very different. And for some people, the only people they can really talk to about that are the people who were involved, which can involve, obviously, the defendant or the perpetrator. And so there were a couple of opportunities when I was working in criminal defence to actually bring people together for some structured conversations about what had occurred and what the impacts were, and also to see if reparations could be made in some way, which usually involved apologies or agreements to take certain steps to improve situations. And I found that quite transformative, obviously, as a practitioner, and watched it be quite transformational for people that were involved. So that really sparked my interest. And then I really opened up Clark & Associates with the sole motivation of trying to provide a really good quality restorative justice service. That area of work is not very profitable for Clark & Associates. So we also offer all of our other fantastic services, which allow us to be a business that offer a really good, accessible, quality restorative justice service to community as well. And it's an area of work that I think is really important. The importance of being a criminal defence lawyer before doing this work, I think, there are a few reasons why it's so important. The first is that you have a really good, intricate understanding, again, of what the court processes look like, so that you can help people understand that. The second reason why I think it's so important is because having worked as a legal practitioner in criminal defence, I've seen firsthand what that process can mean for individuals. And so it's given me an ability to be quite compassionate, both towards, obviously, victims and survivors of crime and their individual experiences, but also criminal defendants who often come from a trauma background as well.
So restorative justice is also a term that we hear used in schools when it comes to bullying, and also in the workplace. So is that a misuse of the term, or do you think that there's a role there to play where it's not a criminal matter, but it's a matter where people have a personal conflict of some kind, and where this sort of process you're talking about, which is a victim and a perpetrator, can in some way come together to share those experiences?
Yeah, no, it's not a misuse of the term. You're absolutely correct. It is used as a type of mediation in other areas, like, for example, incidents in schools or in the education system, and not necessarily just for bullying. It can also be interactions between teachers or staff members, as well as teacher-students or student-students. And it's an area that's really quite commonly used, in particular in Queensland schools. And there's a fantastic practitioner named Margaret Thorsborn, who is really a leader in this area, who I know. And she does an amazing job of educating schools about the use of restorative justice, not only in a mediation setting, but just in a process of dealing with disputes that may occur within schools themselves. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal process. But the reason why restorative justice is so fantastic in all of those areas that you've mentioned, so, criminal matters, in the education system, in workplace disputes, is because when you look at the core of some of those disputes, there has been some incident, there are different perspectives of that incident, there are impacts on the people who have been involved in those incidents and harms that have potentially been caused. So having a conversation around what that was like for everybody and what could be done to try and improve either the relationship or the situation, or repair as much as possible the fallout of the incident that has occurred, is a really important thing to do. Because I think about workplace disputes that we handle, for example. People can be very, very seriously impacted by workplace disputes. I know personally, as a practitioner, many of our clients who've been involved in workplace disputes report, mental health difficulties or a decline. Sometimes people report suicidal ideation to us as a result of being involved in a workplace dispute. And then there are flow-on impacts from there, relationship problems that flow on from having difficulties in the workplace, or difficulties, parenting their children, or financial impacts. They're really, really serious harms that we're talking about. It's not, people don't work in isolation.
No, that's right.
Yeah, you don't just say, okay, well, this terrible incident happened at work with my colleague or my boss, but I'll just pop that into a box and then I'll go home and I'll get on with my life there like nothing really matters. And then tomorrow I'll go back, into the coalface and deal with that big issue just in that environment. That's not how people operate.
No, and the reverse is true as well, right? So if we've got personal matters, whether it's a family law dispute or some other personal issue, then of course that can impact mental health, and that can impact our performance in the workplace. And again, it may be something that people don't want to talk about, with their boss or at work, but yet it of course can have a big impact.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I saw a statistic recently about how people who work in HR are reporting an increase in their staff coming to them to talk about their family, separation issues,
right.
and how they feel completely unqualified to assist them in respect of those issues. Yeah.
Well, I suppose it's a positive thing if people feel open to at least talk about it, and they can be referred to the appropriate services, hopefully. Excellent. Well, Kate, it's wonderful to hear a lot of your background and the wonderful work that you're doing. So I can see that the way that you've gone about setting up your practice is quite innovative and it's a bit unique. And what we know is that people, innovation comes out of creativity and our innate human creativity. So what are some of the ways that you nurture your creativity in your daily life around your work and your other commitments?
So my sort of outlet for creativity is really in two main areas: cooking, which I absolutely love, and also a little bit of gardening. And now people may assume that I'm a gun gardener, but I'm actually not. So it's not that I'm necessarily very good at it, but I still enjoy it. And I think that a few of those types of creativities, people may have noticed during COVID lockdown periods, I think everybody was getting into a bit of sourdough making and growing tomatoes. But I've really always enjoyed cooking. I'm a bit of a foodie, and that's something that I really like spending a lot of time doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love cooking too. And so then when it comes to gardening, I like to grow things that are edible.
Exactly. It just seems to make sense from an
Herbs,
economical
vegetables.
point of view.
Yeah, that's right. And also so that you can have really fresh herbs in the garden, which are so much better than the ones you can buy from the supermarket.
Yeah. And we all got really scared about the lettuce crisis when that was happening. So I've got a lot of lettuce growing at the moment. Yeah, probably too much.
Yeah, I have a bit of a lettuce patch going on as well. So, excellent. So look, looking back on your career so far, what do you think's been your greatest satisfaction in your professional life?
There are a number of moments that I can think of. Probably the moments that I do feel the most proud of are moments where I know that I've really put in well over 100% effort, which I know is not, accurate mathematically, but really put in my everything to assisting an issue be resolved. And because I've traditionally always worked with people, seeing the benefits for those individuals in having performed my role in that way.
Regardless of what background they might come from, and I mean, perhaps you might tell us a little bit about what backgrounds you think are best suited, but what kind of advice would you have for them if they're thinking about this as a potential career path?
I think in particular, I would really tell people to focus on creating a strong foundation of knowledge in some core area that I think can be of assistance to mediation. So whether that's social work, psychology, or legal practice, I think you need to have that really strong base knowledge for a few reasons. The first is that people need to feel a level of expertise from you as a mediator. And having skills as a mediator is really important. And that's definitely something that you need to learn. But you also need to have a background of experience that feels reassuring for people who are in conflict. And also you need that to be able to perform your role in the best possible way. So I don't think that people should just go directly into mediation. I think that you should have some sort of core experience as a professional in some other capacity first. And I think that that's probably the most important thing. Then the really interesting thing about that is you have to unlearn some of those skills that you learn. When I transitioned from being a lawyer to a mediator, I had to unlawyer myself to develop skills that weren't at the forefront of my professional discourse. Like I had to take a step back from directing people or advising people or specifically navigating and strategizing around one issue. And I had to turn my mind to doing things differently for two people who really need, or at least two people, to help me be this independent, unbiased facilitator of communication and negotiation. And that can be quite tricky because as a lawyer, you just want to solve people's problems straight away. But that's not the role of a mediator. Your role, which probably sounds quite silly to some people, well, of course your role is to solve their problems. But actually your role is to carry people through a process and empower them to resolve their own problems.
Yeah, which is a bit different, isn't it? And it's quite a contrast to what you've just described in that, as a criminal defence lawyer, that you're fighting really hard for one person.
Yes.
And you're literally defending them, right?
Yes.
So you're their advocate, you're on their side, and it's your job to do what's best for them. But as a mediator, then that's completely different, right? Now you have to be neutral, sit in the middle,
and do that for everyone. And it's a difficult juggling act sometimes. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a massive shift that you have to take. And equally for psychologists or social workers, the same applies. They're working with one individual and they're their advocate, or they're there to validate that person's experiences. But in a mediation process, you need to do that in a very collective way for everybody who's going through a dispute together.
Yeah, and
It's
you're not
quite
there to make a clinical diagnosis, right? You're there
or
to,
therapize
yeah,
individuals.
no, that's right.
It's so you have to learn those skills and then unlearn them to an extent, or at least package them up and make sure they're not going to get out during the process of mediation, because it would be inappropriate sometimes to use those. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously, like you've talked about, the skills and the knowledge and the experience of that background is incredibly valuable, but the process is different. So that's what you have to be able to unlearn or relearn if you're going to choose to go down this path.
Yeah, and it's something I sort of realized when I did transition from legal practice to being a mediator only. And I realized that I needed additional skills. So that was the point where I went and started this journey of learning more and more about trauma-informed practice, because that was something that I realized that I probably, even though I understood trauma as a practitioner working in criminal defense and family law, I probably needed additional skills to really do the work that you're doing in dispute resolution, because your role now is so different in the lives of people who are coming to see you, specifically in restorative justice mediations and family dispute resolution.
Yeah, fantastic. So now this is the True Worth podcast, and when I talk about true worth, I'm really, empowering and supporting people to feel respected, valued, and seen. So, how do you, in your own life, how do you embrace your own true worth?
This is a really tricky question for me to answer, but I think when I read the question and I was thinking about it, I thought about that transition I had from law to mediation. And I did go through a bit of an identity crisis in undertaking that shift. And I like to think about things probably far more than I should. And I used to think, why is this so hard? Like, why do I feel like I've lost this part of my identity? And I think when you work in law, there's a few things that happen to you. You have to really be a very confident person, because people need to see that confidence in you so that they believe that you will be able to perform the role of advocating for them.
Yeah.
And then I think sometimes with confidence, ego creeps in quite a lot. And I really, in practice as a lawyer, became very wrapped up in my identity of being a lawyer. And being a lawyer was really all that I was. There weren't other aspects of my identity. For example, I would go to a hairdresser and they'd say, "What do you do for work?" And I'd say, "I'm a criminal defense lawyer." And they would say, "Wow, how do you do that? How do you defend murderers? And how do you, how could you possibly do that work? What's the most interesting case you've ever worked on?" But then when you're a mediator and you go to the hairdresser, people say, "What do you do for work?" And you say, "I'm a mediator." And they say,
What's that?
What's that? Or what do you really do? Or, and so there was this loss of identity, but there was also, I guess, this loss of ego, or a realization that ego had come to the forefront in my identity as a lawyer. And I really did go through a process of having to give worth to the other parts of who I am, and do that for myself, because, as I said, there were observations made by people around me that I wasn't a real lawyer anymore, and I didn't, continue with my career in law, and what that may or may not mean, for example. And it also coincided with me becoming a mother for the first time, of course. So I think a lot of mothers go through a bit of an identity crisis too.
Yeah.
You're nodding in agreement. So I
for sure.
know you know what I'm talking about. And people saying to you, "What do you do?" "I'm a stay-at-home mother." Also, you watch people's eyes glaze over, and they don't see or recognize that worth in that role. So for me, true worth has been a journey of learning that all of these aspects of who I am are really important, not just what I do for work, which actually I feel really blessed that I've had that realization, because I think if I fast forwarded in a career only as a legal practitioner to retirement age, I'd probably be having that identity crisis at the age of 65 or 70,
Yeah.
which I think is a really common phenomenon that people go
Yeah.
through when they've
Yeah.
been working in a profession for all their lives. And I'm glad that I went through it at an earlier time where I have the ability of recognizing that all of these other things that I do are really important.
Yeah.
And working in mediation has been a really fantastic process for me and my family because it's very consultant type based work, which means that I get to be a really good quality mum, a really good quality partner, a really good quality daughter, friend, etc., not just a really good quality lawyer.
Yeah, and all those things are so important, aren't they, to our life as a whole. I think it's one of these fundamentals, around true worth is that what we do is not who we are.
Yes.
It's not the only thing about who we are. And I think it's so easy for our work to be so embedded in our identity, or for those two things to be so connected that we almost can't separate ourselves from, what our paid work, is or isn't. So yeah, look, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that'll be really valuable to others as well. Thanks so much for joining me today, Kate. This has been a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for sharing what you have today. If this conversation has sparked your interest, I'd love for you to join us in our True Worth community, where we'll share insights, ideas and inspiration. And you can find that at trueworth.mn.co. Thank you all very much.